Why sit in traffic when you can ride transit? With improved service on the Metro and fare-free rides on Dash, traveling in and around the capital region has never been easier. Did you know that you can map your commute around the DMV using any mode of public transit? Yellow Line service is back on track in Alexandria with a new stop at the Potomac Yard VT Metro Rail Station. Getting around Northern Virginia has never been easier. Leave the car keys and stress at home and hop on a train, bus, or bike. Plan your trip at novarides.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, Carlos Sainz has finally won a Grand Prix. After, I think, 30 races, maybe even 50 races of betting on a Carlos Sainz win. Saumil Arora has finally hit gold the way Carlos Sainz has hit gold. Yes, it's that gold medal which drivers suddenly have started to be getting since the last many races. We have no idea what that is, but that is precisely why I am opening this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast, because Saumil literally was on the streets dancing and celebrating a Carlos Sainz win, while most of us, maybe me, was ruining the fact that Red Bull Racing didn't get the 11th win on streak with Max Verstappen. But, Saumil, how are the celebrations?
If you can sense that my voice is somewhat low this week, it's because I have been down celebrating so bad. Like, I've only just gotten sober to record this episode. Because why not? For all those who thought my Carlos Sainz prediction was away, it was never away. It was always in the background. It is always in the background. But just the right occasion to bring it out, and Carlos Sainz does it. But I can't believe it. I'm sorry, but Sunday was incredible. But has Saturday sank in for you yet, Kunal? I know the gravity of a Carlos Sainz win is something else, but a Red Bull not in Q3 at all? That just isn't making sense to me yet. I've had so many friends calling me and saying, dude, you said Formula One was getting boring for a bit. What's up? What do you say to everyone? This is amazing.
Well, I had a friend message me saying I am going to launch a petition to have 12 out of 24 races in Singapore. And I said,
Yes.
You know what? Max will still win the other 12 and get the world championship. But either...
The way he drove on Sunday, finally coming back to get P5 in that self-proclaimed shitbox of a car, if I can put it that way. It's amazing how even in the worst of the weekends they're able to pull off something like that. But hey, it's not about Red Bull. It's just not about Red Bull. I can't hide my smile. Okay, but what are you feeling like, Kunal? At the end of the entire weekend, what's on your mind first?
The one thing on my mind is, we always imagined what would 2023 Formula One be like without Red Bull Racing. Well, the Singapore Grand Prix was a live example. This is exactly what Formula One can be like without Red Bull Racing. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them. I'm not saying whatever. I'm just saying we all wanted to check what's it like, and we actually got what's it like.
No, we wouldn't want Red Bull Racing to be out of Formula One. That way, Helmut Marko won't be able to come on our show, and we won't be able to get Christian Horner or David Coulthard or all the other big guests that we have on the Inside Line F1 podcast. So please stay Red Bull Racing, but be just half competitive all the time. Because how often, honestly, Kunal, in your entire life, have you seen 4 cars battling? Actually, 3 at the end, but we'll talk about that in a second. But 4 cars battling for the win for literally the last 5 to 6 laps of the race. That is why we watch racing in the first place. And okay, I know Mercedes didn't win it. I know George Russell made the rarest of rare errors. It's kind of like Carlos Sainz in Sochi 2020 where he just couldn't judge the wall. That sort of stuff. But nevertheless, the fact that they tried for a win instead of settling for P2, take my heart, Mercedes. That's more like it. I'm not a fan, but if I ever had to pick one team, I think that gets me somewhat closer. The daringness to do that, it's quite something actually.
It is. They went on the attack instead of being on the defense. And this is, of course, while also attacking Carlos Sainz on track. Like George Russell said, I want to win this race. And he said, you need to keep putting the pressure on Carlos Sainz. And, now it's getting a little unstructured, which is fun because it's more like a conversation that's going to go on for maybe an hour. But when George Russell crashed that Mercedes, I actually thought of Saumil Arora. I'm like, my goodness, this guy is going to be up clapping, screaming, hooting. And usually, and mind you guys, Saumil is a very well accomplished commentator. So, usually you don't really celebrate a driver spinning, crashing, especially because they're working hard for it. I mean, unless it's a driver like Latifi or Mazepin, and I mean that with all seriousness, right? When you have a driver as talented as Russell, and yes, Russell has also had his errors, but hey, guess what? Hamilton, not so many errors when he was small, when he was a younger driver. Sorry, Verstappen has had errors, and Vettel has had errors, and so on. But the key point is this battle for car, battle for the lead of the race, for the win of the race, Carlos Sainz judging it to perfection. And my mind goes back to that post race radio message from Ferrari. That was a smart race, that was very intelligently driven, and it was his brain along with his talent that got Carlos Sainz the win, Samuel.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos Sainz, seriously, I know why he does such strong shoulder workouts, because the guy has the biggest brain in the entire world. Like, he's strategizing on his own. And even though, Kunal, we had a bit of a scare, like Ferrari didn't do a double stack properly. We just have to put it out there in the universe, right? It just happened, so we have to tell the world. It's never a clean weekend. It's never perfect. But even after all of that, they still got Carlos Sainz to judge it to perfection. And the radio message that I loved the most from this entire weekend was Carlos Sainz saying, yeah, the gap is zero point 0.6 because it's intentional. I'm letting Lando Norris come past. Wow, man. Come on. Like, you're meant to be a racing driver, not a strategist or a chess player or something quite like that. This is Formula One. Honestly, this is what Formula One is meant to be all about. Strategy all the way through. And okay, let's just consolidate things all together, because we both are clearly very emotional. So let's just tell you who we are firstly. We are Carlos Sainz fans. Yes, deep down we are. So welcome to the Carlos Sainz Appreciation Club podcast, or sometimes known as the Inside Line F1 podcast. My name is Saumil Arora. I am the host of the Indian Racing League. I sleep with a Carlos Sainz bed sheet at times, so you need to know that about me. But I'm, as always, joined by Kunal Shah, the former marketing head of the Force India F1 team, who now works as an F1 consultant and an FIA-accredited F1 journalist for the Viaplay network in Norway. You had studio duties this weekend, Kunal. Just talk me through what the environment was like over there in that last lap when Russell made that error. Because at the end of the day, I know we're all professionals who work in the sport. We make some money out of it here and there. But at the end of the day, these are moments where the fan inside you really sort of wakes up, doesn't it?
It does. And there was so much excitement because, you want to see cars battling. You want them to sort of make a mistake, not make a mistake, drive to precision. And then the George Russell overtake at first seemed like a driver error. But it actually wasn't really a driver error. Yes, it was a driver error, but it was not a blatant driver error under pressure or something. And we'll come to that, right? But I'm going to tell you why I think it was a very intelligent win, right? Carlos Sainz got pole position, which was purely on talent. Okay.
Yeah.
And even his pole lap actually was a very intelligent one. So in Singapore, the soft tire was not lasting the full lap. Charles Leclerc actually lost pole position because turn 17 he had a snapper oversteer and he lost a tenth and a half. And it's publicly known, right? So to make sure you had tires for the third sector, you sort of compromised the first sector. Every driver was doing that. But if you go back and see Carlos Sainz's first lap or last lap in Q3, he attacked the first sector. He cooled it down for the second sector, which was not the major sector where Ferrari was pulling a gap because it's got all the slow speed stuff. But he saved those tires for the third sector. He got his pole position on the last two corners of his flying lap from George Russell. That's brainwave number one. This is, guys and girls, this is not down to just driving intuition alone. It's down to a lot of data digging. You know exactly which corners your car's doing well, not doing well, where you can gain and lose advantage. And that's what Carlos is known to be doing. As you all would know, and Saumil knows this, he's known to be a thinking driver. He's constantly thinking, right? So that was brainwave number one. The second brainwave, which I'm sure is collectively done by Ferrari, if you see his average lap time, and we are going to probably ask Nityanand to do this, Carlos Sainz was doing 100 seconds a lap, right? 1 minute 40, 1 minute 40, 1 minute 40.
Yeah.
For the first 20 laps of the race, even the slowest driver, Logan Sargent, was doing 1 minute 40 seconds a lap, which usually doesn't happen, right? But that was another strategy. They knew they didn't have the tires, so they were managing the pace of the race to an extent where they can protect their tires and, crucially, bunch up the entire grid.
And that takes so much of composure, Kunal, because honestly, at that level of driving, I mean, I know Singapore is a tricky circuit to pass on, regardless, but moves can be made. If you're genuinely lacking pace, as we saw with Lewis Hamilton and Sergio Perez, a tricky, bold move can be done. So for Carlos Sainz to just step out there, hold his hand up and say, no, 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 I won't drive as fast as I possibly can. I will bunch everybody up. And that too, in that McLaren, in terms of practice, right, when you look at all the data, their lap times were flying. I mean, they were incredibly quick, somewhere around the top two, three teams. And then you have someone like George Russell in the Mercedes, who throughout the entire weekend hasn't made an error. To do that and to raise your hand up and say, no, I will bunch everybody up is genuinely a courageous decision. And also that, speaking of Carlos Sainz brainwaves, in qualifying as well, Charles Leclerc got completely boxed up in terms of where he went for the qualifying order. Carlos Sainz confident as ever. I'll go first. I'll figure it out. Okay, I don't mind the track evolution coming back to bite me, but I know I need an open set of tarmac. I need some degree of air to put my lap time in. Even if it means I'll have to barge my way past initially, I'll do that because I want time to warm up my tires. And guess what? Leclerc's final lap wasn't properly warmed up eventually. And we saw so many other Mercedes cars also struggling because they just didn't have enough prep time properly. But Sainz did. So just small little things adding up, which is good. It's like the moment you eliminate Red Bull Racing, you open up your eyes to so many possibilities of everything that's happening around. So thank you for not having a good car this weekend, Red Bull. I'm so glad.
And
What
let's
really
also
happened there, Kunal? Because it was also a mystery, right, in that regard.
It was a mystery. We'll get to that. And, one of the things that's important to explain is why Carlos Sainz was bunching it up. Yes, I said tire degradation. He was reducing the rate of tire wear. But crucially, what he was doing is he was not letting the field open up a gap. So what happens is if his rivals, Lando Norris, who was in second place, or George Russell, who was also in second place, wanted to pit, they couldn't pit and come out in open air. I mean,
Yeah.
and if you look at the example when Checo Perez pitted from fifth place, he came out in P18. Why? Because the field was all bunched up, and that's what Ferrari was trying to do. They were trying to keep the field all bunched up so that nobody's able to make a pit stop and undercut them, because the undercut was supposed to be very, very powerful in Singapore, right? And I just loved the whole execution by Ferrari. They were very sure we will sacrifice a 1-2 or a 1-3 to get a race win. They even split race start tires on Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Leclerc got the jump on Russell and sort of opened up a gap while trying to keep, Carlos Sainz protected. And I think it was just flawless execution by Ferrari. And I really hope this sort of trend continues, because we saw it in Monza. We've seen it now in Singapore. Two different circuits.
Yeah.
Two different kind of circuits. Very low downforce to very high downforce. The big common factor is shorter apex corners. Ferrari struggles when the corners keep going on and on, like, for example, turn 3 in Barcelona, right? And it's lovely when Ferrari just ends up winning in Formula One.
Everyone's smiling today. It feels like a good day. It feels like a happy day for some reason. Suddenly, the sky is a little bit bluer. The moon is a little bit more shiny. The sun is shining brighter in Norway as well, I see, Kunal, for some reason. So it's incredible that it's joy, it's happiness. All you need in life is for Ferrari to keep on winning, which is great. And okay, where do we go to next? Because we've covered Carlos Sainz, we've poured our heart out. We've now, okay, I don't think we've expressed the shock and horror of Red Bull not winning every single race, because you and I, Kunal, have officially lost the bet to F1 Stats Guru, and I'm so glad we have. So for a second, I'll just take a deep breath and, oh my God, it's actually happened. So it's hard to put it out there firstly. But sorry, what was Saturday all about? Like, normally I don't like to listen to commentators on Saturdays. Just more fun to watch the cars do their own thing. But I really love this one comment that Martin Brundle actually made afterwards. It said that the Red Bull actually looks like the worst car, and if you watch every single onboard, every single car, okay, maybe barring the Alfa Romeo, just turns in so well through the corners where you know that, okay, the car can slide around a little bit. If you chuck it in, it's got enough momentum and enough commitment, barring Lance Stroll's Aston Martin as well. That's a different story. But the Red Bulls, they looked leery. They looked like they didn't want to move. And that's strange. So it's not the technical directive. That's what clearly is the message. It's not the tires. It's not the suspension changes, not the floor. Have you gotten down to the bottom of it, or would Red Bull even know at this stage, to be honest?
There's a bit of guesswork that's been going on in the paddock. And again, I look back to Mark Hughes, who's actually one of my journalists to go back and consume F1 content from. He's made it very clear. Red Bull came with a new suspension, a softer suspension, given that Singapore has a lot of bumps. There's a resurfaced track resurfaced parts of Singapore were not as bumpy, but the old parts were. So on Friday, they use a softer suspension. On Saturday, they realized that the harder suspension will actually do better, right? But what was happening is that they couldn't run their car as low as they wanted. Otherwise, they would have sort of been illegal because of plank wear. So they raised the height. And then the minute you raise the height, they lost performance. And Red Bull's performance, as we know, comes from that really complicated underflow, which is what, no other team has sort of been able to crack. So the minute they raised the car was just not drivable. And one of the challenges was that they were not able to put in the tires. And, I think Perez who said, I just couldn't load the fronts up, which means he just couldn't get any front grip, right?
Yeah.
So it was just down to the characteristics of the circuit, how the car needs to be dialed in. And I think it's a coincidence that it happened on a weekend when a technical directive was, issued to control flexing of F1 car parts. I don't believe it's flexi floor, flexi wings that has caught Red Bull out. Yes, we will know more only in Japan, but Max Verstappen actually said that when he drove the Singapore settings in the simulator, the car was really undrivable. They switched to the Japanese settings and he said, yes, that's it. That's my car. It's all back to normal. So at least he believes that it's all going to be fine. But here's a question, Somil, that we should probably leave behind for our listeners and viewers. That remember, Red Bull has an aero penalty. They have 10% less aero, available than everybody else. This directive, if Red Bull needs to do more aero testing, aero research to make sure that they comply fully, did they have lesser resources to run tests? I'm just throwing up a question. Maybe we'll know the answer just enough in about 4 or 5 days' time. But what's important is for us to throw up the question.
Yeah, exactly. And wait a minute. I think that throws up another question because F1 Stats Guru, I remember, he made a lovely reel about when Max Verstappen could realistically seal up the championship as early as possible. I hate to say it, but it's been thrown away to the side because he's not won every single race in a row, and it won't happen in Japan, which means that Red Bull Racing should be happier now because their biggest PR day of the entire year won't come up at 5 o'clock in the European morning. So actually, even earlier than that, no, it's what time is Japan for you guys, Kunal?
Well, it's a 7 a.m. start, but you're right. It just seems really early. We'll all be preparing for it from 5 a.m. So that time was actually not bad. But why don't we? You touched upon Mercedes. No, wait. Before we go to Mercedes, the big question, it's a puzzle. Red Bull's loss of pace in qualifying is as puzzling as Max Verstappen not picking up a grid penalty for impeding, despite having 3 investigations on Saturday. I think yes, it's. I know we have a lot of listeners from the Netherlands. Again, no biases, no appeasing the fan base, etc. But Max should have gotten a penalty for the whole Tsunoda incident and not just a financial one for the team. That's my view, Samuel.
Easily. I think there were so many other ones that also just got away. Because I remember I kept on checking the FIA final list of incidents under review and they just kept on piling up one after the other. But barely any penalties got through at the very end, which was strange for me to see at the end. So there's also a little bit inconsistent in the way things were delivered, but that's just classic FIA, right? But I am not complaining. It's okay. Red Bull we got one weekend where we got to see what Formula One can really be like. So I'm not going to complain on that at all. What I am
But
going to
but but
be.
but I'm going to
Yeah.
complain about it, and I'll tell you why. I mean,
Uh,
what the FIA in a sense said is yes, Max Verstappen impeded Yuki Tsunoda, but he impeded Yuki Tsunoda because Red Bull didn't give him enough information on the radio.
yeah.
So in effect, they said it was not the driver to blame, but the team was to blame, and they penalized the team 5,000 euros or something, which is loose change for a Formula One team. But what this does, Samuel, is it gives teams a chance to actually use this proceed. It'll become a precedent in the races to follow. I
Yeah.
just won't tell you on the radio out of purpose. You'll block a rival. You won't get a sporting penalty or a grid penalty, but we'll just pay 5,000 euros. But hey, guess what? We ruined a rival's race. And in this case, that rival was a Red Bull driver, Yuki Tsunoda, who got kicked out of Q2, but he actually topped Q1. He was the fastest in Q1. And guess who got
Yeah.
through to Q3? Liam Lawson. At least at this stage in their careers, you'd assume that Tsunoda has a couple of tenths on Lawson just purely because of experience and wisdom of being a Formula One driver for Alpha Tauri
Wisdom.
for now is third
Did
year.
you
Yeah,
just
he's a
associate the? Did you associate the word wisdom with Yuki Tsunoda? I'm sorry, but like that's just not. Like,
I would associate the word wisdom with a driver who's been now doing 3 seasons versus a driver who's done 3 races. You are wiser in the car, out of the car, etc.
that's kind of like saying Carlos Sainz is absolutely careless and like thoughtless, if that's a word, if that really means wisdom with Yuki. What are we talking about? Like,
In
come on.
comparison to Lawson,
I get where you're coming from, though. I get where you're
yeah,
coming from, but I like that we're touching upon this because before we go to Lando Norris, talk about McLaren and also just a bit on Mercedes. Liam Lawson outqualified Yuki Tsunoda, and I know the circumstances were kind of shady in which it happened, but I know it was also hard to see who was the real fastest driver because track evolution was so prominent that again it was tricky to compare lap times, and once you really have that big gulf in qualifying, it's anyone's guess right at Singapore. So Lawson really capitalized on that so well. Something that let's say, I mean, it's an Alpha Tauri. It's not Oscar Piastri's McLaren. It can't really climb up that much on Sunday, so you can't really blame Tsunoda a lot for that as well. But eventually, it's interesting because in that little battle, I am genuinely curious to know who's the faster driver now, and that's incredible because suddenly you have another story to track. And being a Red Bull Racing management person, being Helmut Marko, it's another really stupid problem to have because once Daniel Ricciardo is fit, what do you do? Do you break the momentum of this young driver who's constantly beating his teammate? Like, I don't know. What are you meant to do in that case? So it's a good
it's a
challenge to
brilliant
have.
headache. Yeah, it's a brilliant headache for Red Bull Racing and Alpha Tauri for 2023. In fact, could just very well be in the next couple of races whenever Daniel decides to come back, because Yuki himself said he's been told he's on a race by race basis, and Japan could very well be his final race for Alpha Tauri, because Ricardo is expected to be back around Qatar or thereabouts, which is a race after Japan, right?
Yeah.
But Liam Lawson finished ninth, scoring 2 points, which means he's 1 point away from Yuki Tsunoda. Liam Lawson's ninth place is actually Alpha Tauri's best result in a race in 2023. He's already ahead. He's already 19th in a 22 driver championship, right? And I would say actually both the rookies went off well. Yeah, 2 out of 3 rookies went off well, because Logan Sargent, despite driving 10 seconds off the expected pace, still managed to clip a wall and bring out a safety car and all of that. But Oscar Piastri in the points, the Q1 elimination, bringing him in the points despite not having the upgraded McLaren in Singapore. So the rookies did absolutely fantastic. And McLaren,
No,
since don't you think so?
no, not all the
Two,
rookies.
two
Like
out
one
of
of
three
them.
rookies. Yeah.
What do you mean
66% of
three
them.
rookies? We had 4 rookies.
I missed that.
Not in the race, not on Sunday. On Saturday, at least, we had 4 rookies. Sorry, I'm just gonna let that slide. Hopefully, he's doing better physically, because it's not great to see a driver not taking part in the race. But what was that
Ooh.
qualifying? Sorry, but like, uh, uh, I really hope he's physically doing better because you never wish ill on anyone. But
I mean,
come
he
on,
had a crash pre-season and he had a shoulder, whatever, I think wrist injury,
I
etc. No,
hope
but
it's
yeah,
not aggravated. But
we don't wish ill on anybody, especially in terms of health, like you said.
what are those qualifying gaps, man? Seriously, it's and you know what? Mike Crack has the audacity to come back on the air and has told the media that the crash in Singapore showed Lance Stroll's commitment. What? What sort of rubbish is that meant to mean? Honestly, like I think Mike Crack is the new Christian Horner because I'm just absolutely trying to ignore every single one of his media statements, but I can't because they're all equally rubbish, one after the other. What do you mean by the crash shows his commitment?
Somal, when you are going to be paid, or when and if you are ever paid by Lawrence Stroll to speak well about Lance Stroll, you will find different ways to make Lance Stroll not seem stupid at all. You will find every way to equate him to a four times world champion like he did last year. I mean, I think Mike Crack's job is easier this year because last year he had to say statements where he was equating Lance Stroll to a four times world champion. This year onwards, he has to equate him to a two times world champion. 50% of the work lesser this time. I mean, if he can sound silly, why can't I? Right?
No,
But
but
terrible
you're right.
race,
If
terrible
I was
race for
earning,
Aston Martin.
exactly, but if I was earning like 2-3 million a season, which I'm assuming what again maybe more, maybe less, but if it's that sort of money, yeah, I think that's because we find a way to be more creative on the inside line. At least we try to be more creative on the inside line F1 podcast every week, right? So my crack is not different to you and me, Kunal, in that regard. So I think he's one of us. He's good fun.
Yeah, I mean, Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso for the first time failed to score points at a Grand Prix weekend in 2023, which means only Verstappen and Hamilton are the two drivers who continue to have scored points at every race. Aston Martin now is some 72 points from second place, which is where they want to be. And if you remember mid-season, I made a bold prediction. McLaren are going to catch Aston Martin. There's an 80-point gap. Well, is it?
Yeah.
77-point gap or something, right? But or 78 points if my math is correct, mental math. But imagine this. I mean, in the last two races, McLaren has scored 28 points, whereas Aston Martin has scored 2 points. Okay. But
Wow.
that's to do with Aston Martin. We saw rare driver errors from Fernando Alonso as well. Pit lane was clearly, an indecision becoming a decision, but then he just sort of let things through. But let's talk of one of Fernando Alonso's previous teams, McLaren, because Lando Norris drove to second place, scoring his third podium of the season. He was literally the least spoken driver on the podium. It was either Carlos Sainz is going to win or George Russell from P4 is or P3 is whatever he was is going to go to win. But hey, he's going to just drive past Lando Norris to claim the win. But excellent execution by Lando Norris on a weekend where McLaren brought significant upgrades to his car.
Yeah, I think honestly that last four laps when you saw the McLaren sliding around on the exit of every corner, the Mercedes also to a decent degree because by that point they chewed up their tires just a little bit. But the composure, because I honestly thought, and I had lots of new F1 fans actually watching the race with me as well this time, they were all dead certain, as I was, that hey, Lando Norris is just going to be a pushover. Like it was just a matter of time that they get past the McLaren and then they fight with the Ferrari. But no, he didn't. He actually held it up so well. And even in qualifying, I know he eventually got pushed over a little bit here and there because of a couple of really good laps in the final part of qualifying by all the other drivers. But if that upgraded McLaren can do that well, Kunal, and we genuinely have a fight for P2 in the championship, which is, no, I mean, P2 in the Constructors' Championship, I mean. Wait, actually, how bad has Sergio's season been? Let me just quickly check the point standings. Because where is he actually?
Checo is now 43 points ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So, and Lando Norris, I mean, let's look at his race. He's 50 points ahead of Lance Stroll in 8th place, but that's not really the benchmark. He's only 12 points behind George Russell in 7th place. And George, of course, has scored just once in the last 3 races, or basically since the summer break, he scored just in one race in Monza, which was 10 points. But Lando Norris has scored 28 points. So that McLaren, since it's been upgraded, Lando's actually outscored George Russell since Austria. So to my mind, McLaren's late season recovery might not reflect their actual positions in the championship, but bears really well for what's to come in 2024.
Yeah, I actually love this because it's funny how Aston Martin somehow are still second in the championship, but no, wait, are they?
No, they're down to 4th.
They're down to 4th now, correct. But like for majority of the entire season, right, up until I think a couple of weekends ago, second in the championship. But for the last 5-6 weeks, we saw that just wasn't clearly the case at all. And then the same with Mercedes as well, floating somewhere through in the midfield, McLaren all the way down. I like how we're seeing fluctuations. And so all we really, really need is some volatility. Maybe if they can all close up to Red Bull Racing, imagine how beautiful the product might be every single week, and imagine how much business would all flourish for everyone as well. Because I mean, it generally makes an impact, Kunal, because every time we do events as well, we touch wood, we do have a really, really dedicated core group of followers who come to every single Inside Line F1 pit stop. But you notice a difference because when the races are not as fun, you normally tend to have, let's say, around 80, 90 odd people. But when it's super fun, when things are really buzzing, 150, 170 odd people constantly popping in and here and there, that's where the fun really is, right? But you have more people interested in. So this weekend, looking at the hype, looking at all the social media, I think that's where you really feel like, wow, this is what the sport can truly do. Which is why, before we get to speak to Mercedes for a second, can we just write a small love letter to Singapore? Because heading into this weekend, we asked the question that if every single street race is a night race, why does Singapore still somehow find a way to be special? And I have thought about this a little bit. I don't know how I can articulate it, but something about it. Maybe just the visuals of cars flying through those exact streets that maybe you've seen as a child or something like that. Maybe it's just the lights seem extra bright, the corners seem extra tricky. Something about Singapore just works. Is never a bad race here ever.
I think everything about Singapore just works, and especially the opening lap. Every car was throwing up sparks, and I loved it. Fernando Lewis Hamilton tried to do a Fernando Alonso, just that you can't be as cheeky as Fernando Alonso ever, and then Lewis had to give back those positions, etc. But yes, you're right. Singapore, the original night race, just always delivers excitement. And I mean, every single Singapore Grand Prix has had a safety car period. We had one this race as well, even though it was a little doubtful that you need a safety car for those bits of wings. But the FIA just knows better. But I think the whole physical challenge, the mental challenge, the walls being so close, and Mercedes, actually, why don't we just speak about them? They're the only team that's probably left from our key talking points. And the reason why I said walls and I thought of Mercedes is because George Russell drove into that wall. And it just shows, like there are times when racing car drivers are like donkeys, and I said this on the...
One second. I didn't say that with a straight face.
Yeah, I said that with a straight face because you're so focused on, overtaking the driver ahead. You're following the driver's tire tracks, literally, right? What happened in that George Russell incident? Toto Wolff said lapse of concentration. George Russell also said that. But really, what he was doing, he just was following Lando Norris's tracks. Lando Norris nudged the wall, and boom, George Russell hit the wall. Why? Because, hey, I'm going to follow his track so closely that if he hits the wall, I'm going to hit the wall. And that's what happened, right? But a great weekend for George Russell. He was P2, Mercedes, a brilliant strategy, tried to go win the race, attacked. And, Lewis Hamilton came alive in the latter part of the race as well. Yeah. And they were on the podium.
But you know what? Actually, 2 points to add to that. It really happens with young racing drivers as well, because I've been lucky enough to watch so many of them through their development phase. They've not all gone to become Formula One drivers or even F3 drivers, but you can see how they mature when you see them from go-karting to Formula 4 levels and all that stuff. And even the kids do that. Like every single time when they race, they tend to metamorphose into the other driver that they see in front of them, when sometimes they even tend to gain lap times in terms of that. So it's fun to see that happen. And then one small error, and the same, I've seen this with bike riders quite a fair bit as well, in bike racing, where they're so hell-bent on following their lines and making sure that they're able to understand the strengths and weaknesses. Like they're actually studying the car up ahead. So if they make an error, they just, boom, straight up end up doing the same thing. It's a really fun phenomenon. Monkey see, monkey do. But for George Russell, actually, Kunal, throughout the weekend until that last lap, I don't know, but it felt like he made Lewis Hamilton look like an ordinary teammate, especially in qualifying. Like 4 tenths the gap in qualifying. Like what? And they were all on a similar run plan, similar warm-up plan as well. And that was like, whoa, something's gone horribly wrong for Lewis Hamilton. Because I know there's been weekends where Hamilton has been equally faster in comparison to George Russell. But I like when there's two alphas in one team, because then they're constantly trading blows to each other. And one weekend you see Hamilton punching Russell straight up and making him look like an amateur. And then this weekend, the way Russell performed all the way through, up until literally the last lap, I think that was such a great performance. It kind of feels a lot like Sakya 2020, but just like with Russell being the culprit at the end. it's like a brilliant performance in every single way. Like, also, I know we mentioned this at the start of the episode, but the call to go out there and say, guys, we need to do something about the win. Let's just grab on the medium tires. Let's try something. Let's make something happen. I know it didn't work out, but just like with Lando Norris Sochi 2021, I remember us discussing the same thing. You can't fault the intent. Like, it's a driver going for a race win. That's what we all love to see, isn't it?
Yeah, and George Russell after qualifying, if you asked him, "Hey, what's your name?" He'll say, "I'm George Russell. I drive for Mercedes. Hey, I have a new set of medium for tomorrow's race." Where have you qualified? I've qualified in P2. Hey, I have a new set of medium for tomorrow's race. What are you going to eat for dinner? I'm going to eat sushi. But hey, I have a new set of medium for tomorrow's race. He actually was so happy and proud about the fact that Mercedes ran an offset strategy all the way from free practice. And then that medium tire came to use, literally got him the race
Yep.
win, at least got in the podium. Yes, he was second, traded that to finish third, but eventually crashed. But like you said, Somil, they wanted to go for the win. And guess what? It was actually Checo Perez that helped Lewis Hamilton and George Russell pit in that part of the race. Because remember at the start of the episode, we said Carlos Sainz was bunching everybody up in the field. But
Yeah.
guess what Checo Perez was doing to help Max Verstappen? He was holding up a DRS train, if you guys remember, which included Esteban Ocon as well, who had a great race. We'll talk about that. But Checo Perez opened up about 10, 11 seconds, between himself and Max. So when they both pitted, Max still, had those 10, 11 free seconds that were there. So when Perez pitted, suddenly there was a gap to Fernando Alonso. And that's when the Mercedes crew said, you know what? We're going to take those new mediums that George Russell has told everybody in the world we have. And then they did all the chasing.
And that was fun to watch. I think those alternate strategy uh, sort of angles and arcs that you get to see in a race as well are so much fun to watch eventually, where you have these different things to track. But that's Mercedes, and again, almost flawless. And it's fun. It's fun because they were just nearly a tenth away the entire time. And Carlos Sainz, being that big brain guy that he is, eventually was able to eke it out. Fun story to watch. But also, the last fun story that we have to talk about eventually, Kunal. I know it's been late in the episode, but we won't let go of this one. Esteban Ocon versus Fernando Alonso. I was eating my heart out. That is racing. You could see the vendetta. I know they were all best friends until last year. They were all really good friends on really good terms. They've never said a bad thing about each other. But the way Esteban drove, it felt like he's trying to kick someone's backside. It didn't feel normal. It felt personal. And then the disappointment in his voice, because he was beating Fernando Alonso fair and square, beating his teammate fair and square as well, beating a Red Bull fair and square as well. And then the engine went down. I was like, come on, man. That's the last thing in the world that can happen. But did you also feel that that battle really was personal? It just wasn't normal. Something was off about it.
Of course, it was personal, and the jury's still out there. Did they touch or did they not touch? Or was there a hair's breadth gap between the two of them? But yes, unfortunate for Esteban Ocon and Alpine. They suddenly have really good races or really bad ones. And that's what's been happening off late as well. Qualifying, either they are in Q3, both cars, or they're just out of Q1. I hope they hit some bit of stability, because the more teams joining the midfield fight, the more fun it is. And today,
Yeah.
like I said, we saw how Formula One can be if we don't have Red Bull at the front. Did I miss them at the front? Yes, I did. But this was an example of how great Formula One has been or can be when we don't have Red Bull out there at the
Yeah.
front.
I mean, honestly, most people say, "Oh, dude, it's become a boring sport now." That's only because we're forced to see someone at the top, and you can't blame them for that, right? Clearly, they're just too good. But the product behind is madness, and today was just one opportunity for people to realize. So, if you have any friends or family members who haven't been watching Formula One lately and have been saying it's boring, 2023 Singapore GP, show them that, and then tell us why Formula One really is not a good product. Because it is. We just need the teams to close up just that little bit. But hopefully, Japan is something similar. Hopefully, we get to see more teams fighting up there on merit, even though Red Bull is doing a good job over there. So let's hope that something similar happens. And we'll be back for our Japanese GP preview episode as well on the Inside Line F1 podcast. So stay tuned for that. And also, We're going to be opening up the link for the next Inside Line F1 pit stop at Car Social for the Japanese GP as well in Mumbai. So if you're around town, let's watch the race together and it'll be a ton of fun. But folks, thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you so much for being such a continued patron of the Inside Line F1 podcast as well. So in case you have loved listening to all of our stuff, subscribe to the Inside Line F1 podcast. Share this episode with all your friends and family members. And also, if you've reached this far, join us in also wishing F1 Stats Guru speedy recovery as well. So fingers crossed on that front as well. But folks, thank you. And we'll see you for the Japanese GP preview. Bye-bye.
On Florida's Space Coast, we think you can have the best of both worlds. Kind of like right now. Driving, at your desk, maybe at the gym, but you're also grooving to some music. Visit us and you'll go to the beach and see a rocket launch. Or go kayaking and manatee spotting. It's all waiting for you on the only beach that doubles as a launch pad. Plan your adventure today at visitspacecoast.com.